Get out. You're nothing but a disappointment." Those words didn't just echo in the luxurious living room of our family mansion. They reverberated through every memory I had of growing up under my father's impossible expectations. I froze for a moment, feeling a mix of shock and quiet defiance, my hands gripping the edge of the imported mahogany table. My father's face was red with rage, veins pulsing at his temples. 28 years old, he spat, his voice shaking with frustration. "And what do you have to show for it?" "Nothing." Behind him, my mother remained seated on the Italian leather sofa, her posture rigid, lips pressed into that familiar line of disapproval. The same line she'd worn throughout my childhood whenever I dared to think differently. I could feel her eyes boring into me, silently agreeing with every insult. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Inside, there was a storm raging, but on the surface, I appeared composed. I had worked tirelessly for years to build something meaningful, something beyond the simple metrics of profit that define my family's world. I had a company, yes, Sterling Industries, a company built from scratch, focused on innovation and sustainable business practices. Yet to them, it didn't matter. "You refused to follow the path I set for you," my father continued, gesturing at the plaques and awards lining the walls. Recognition, achievement, profit. It all belonged to their definition of success. My brother Marcus, the so-called golden child, had followed every command, never questioning their methods, never worrying about ethics or long-term impact. Meanwhile, my ideas about sustainability, about ethical business, were dismissed as naive fantasies. "Dad, if you just look at my proposal." I began trying to reach him, to make him see the logic behind my vision. "Enough, Olivia." He cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Your brother secured 3 major contracts this month. You're still talking about ideals and ethics. Business isn't a classroom project. It's about survival, profit, and results." I clenched my jaw, but didn't retreat. "The industry is changing," I said firmly. "If Harrison Industries doesn't adapt, it won't survive the next 5 years. Sustainability isn't optional anymore. It's essential." "Out!" His roar shook the chandeliers above. "Pack your things and leave. If you think you know better than 30 years of experience, go prove it. But don't come crawling back when you fail." I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I walked to my room, packing only what I could carry, my head held high. 3 decades of life in that house, and yet I realized none of it had ever been truly mine. My mother didn't rise to say goodbye. She didn't move an inch. That was 3 years ago. Leaving the mansion was both terrifying and liberating. I remember stepping out into the cold evening air, the sprawling driveway behind me, the gates closing in the distance. For the first time, I was truly on my own. The first months were brutal. Tiny studio apartments, instant noodles, sleepless nights, endless planning. But I refused to let their words define me. Sterling Industries began humbly. Just me, my laptop, and a relentless determination to prove that a business could be both profitable and ethical. I reached out to engineers and innovators overlooked by traditional corporations, people whose brilliance had been dismissed because they didn't fit a mold. Together, we began developing green technologies that could reduce industrial energy consumption by 60%. It was an immediate success. I remember nights spent debugging systems, negotiating contracts, and pitching clients, while my apartment ceiling leaked from last night's rain. I survived on determination and tiny bursts of hope. And then, finally, our first breakthrough. A mid-sized manufacturing company took a chance on us. Our technology saved them millions while drastically cutting their carbon footprint. The news spread quietly at first, but by the end of the first year, Sterling Industries had grown from 3 employees in a cramped office to 30 employees occupying half a floor in a downtown building. By the second year, we had offices in multiple cities, and our client list included some of the largest names in the industry. I kept my identity private. Sterling Industries was known for its innovative CEO, Ms. Evans, but very few knew that Olivia Evans was really Olivia Harrison. the daughter my parents had cast aside. Meanwhile, I watched from afar as Harrison Industries struggled. My father's refusal to adapt, his reliance on outdated methods, had begun to catch up with him. Old contracts were drying up, clients were leaving, and his empire was starting to crumble. I smiled quietly to myself, not out of malice, but because irony is sometimes the most satisfying teacher. The useless daughter was quietly becoming the force they would someday depend on. And then, the first hint of opportunity appeared. The Maxwell Corp contract. It was the chance that could either make or break a company. I knew Harrison Industries needed it desperately, not realizing that 6 months ago, Sterling Industries had quietly acquired a controlling stake in Maxwell through a network of shell companies. Every major decision, every contract, now passed through my hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they had dismissed as useless was now holding the key to their survival. The first 6 months after leaving home were a test I wouldn't wish on anyone. My tiny studio apartment smelled faintly of mildew, and the peeling paint on the walls reminded me daily that I had no safety net. I lived off instant noodles, occasional coffee, and sheer determination. Yet, every night as I lay on the hard mattress, I reminded myself, this is freedom. This is choice. And I will not fail. Sterling Industries began humbly. There were no investors, no glamorous office, just me, a laptop, and a vision that business could be profitable and ethical. I scoured the city, looking for talent that had been overlooked by traditional corporations. I found engineers who were brilliant but ignored because they didn't fit conventional expectations. People who had been told their ideas were impractical or impossible. I saw potential where others saw failure. We started in a cramped co-working space. 3 of us at first, me, an electrical engineer named Carla, and a mechanical designer named Rishi. We worked 18-hour days, coding, prototyping, and endlessly testing. Our first projects failed spectacularly. Machines overheated, software crashed, calculations were off. I learned to embrace failure as a teacher, not an enemy. Late nights became routine. I remember sitting at my desk, staring at the blinking cursor of my email, drafting pitch after pitch to companies who didn't respond or laughed at our proposals. My bank account dwindled. My friends drifted away, unable to understand why I chose exhaustion and uncertainty over a stable paycheck. But deep down, I knew this path was mine alone. And then came the breakthrough. A mid-sized manufacturing company, willing to take a chance on Sterling's green technology. Our system promised to cut their energy consumption by 60%, a staggering number in an industry obsessed with cutting costs. I remember walking into their boardroom, carrying the prototype, my hands steady despite the pounding of my heart. The presentation was tense, questions sharp, and skeptical. But by the end, they nodded, and a contract was signed. The feeling was electric. For the first time, I wasn't just fighting to survive, I was winning. That first client became the cornerstone of Sterling Industries' reputation. Word spread quietly, slowly. Competitors started noticing our technology. Investors began to inquire. Within a year, we expanded from 3 employees to 30, occupying half a floor in a downtown building. By the second year, Sterling had offices in 3 cities. Our clients included some of the largest names in manufacturing, companies that had once dismissed sustainable practices as unnecessary expenses. I kept my identity secret. The press knew of Sterling's innovative CEO, Ms. Evans, but very few knew that Olivia Evans was, in reality, Olivia Harrison, the daughter my parents had deemed useless. It was a silent, private victory. I followed Harrison Industries news from afar. My father's empire, once invincible in my eyes, was struggling to adapt. Contracts were lost. Environmental compliance deadlines were missed. Clients left for competitors who embraced change. I smiled quietly, but not out of spite. Just recognition, irony, in its own subtle way, was delicious. During this time, my team became my second family. Carla and Rishi became more than colleagues. They were collaborators, sounding boards, and reminders that success isn't built alone. We brainstormed, argued, celebrated small victories, and mourned failures together. I learned the importance of trust, communication, and empowerment. Unlike my parents' rigid hierarchy, Sterling thrived on collaboration. Every decision I made reinforced our ethos, profit, and purpose. We developed technologies that cut industrial waste, optimized energy use, and reduced environmental impact without compromising efficiency. Investors who once scoffed began calling, intrigued by our results. By the end of year 2, Sterling Industries was no longer a small startup. It was a recognized player in the industry. Yet, my personal life remained quiet. I didn't seek fame. I didn't need my parents' approval. My focus was the company, the team, and the principle that business could be a force for good. I remembered every word my father had thrown at me. Useless. Failure. Waste of time. I stored those words not as weapons, but as fuel. Every milestone, every client win, every technological breakthrough was a testament to what they had refused to see. And then came the first hint that the past and present were about to collide. The Maxwell Corp contract, the largest opportunity in sustainable technology manufacturing. Landing it could solidify Sterling Industries as the market leader. I knew Harrison Industries would be desperate to secure it. They were struggling to adapt, desperate for validation, and unaware that I had quietly positioned Sterling to control the outcome. 6 months prior, we had acquired a controlling interest in Maxwell Corp through a network of shell companies. Every contract, every decision would now pass through my hands. Harrison Industries unknowingly approached my company for the contract, their future in my hands. The irony wasn't lost on me. The daughter they had cast aside as useless was now the gatekeeper of their survival. As I reviewed Harrison's proposal, a mixture of amusement and satisfaction settled in my chest. They were trying to enter the sustainable market without changing anything. Old methods, empty promises, a desperate bid to save their crumbling empire. I read every clause, every figure, noting the flaws and weaknesses. A text from Marcus arrived. "Dad's really nervous about Maxwell. He keeps saying it's the last chance. Guess you were wrong, sis." I smiled faintly, setting my phone aside. The past 3 years had been a journey of resilience, innovation, and quiet triumph. And now, the moment of reckoning was approaching. The daughter they called useless had become indispensable. Not through revenge, but through vision, strategy, and unwavering self-belief. It was a quiet Wednesday morning when the email arrived. The subject line read, "Maxwell Corp contract proposal, urgent review." My assistant, Sarah, handed me the tablet with a mix of excitement and barely concealed awe. Harrison Industries, the empire that had kicked me out, that had called me useless, was now on the verge of their biggest opportunity in years, and their proposal had landed on my desk. I leaned back in my chair, letting the irony settle in. 3 years ago, I had walked out of their mansion carrying nothing but a suitcase and a spark of determination. Now, the company they had dismissed as naive and impractical was poised to dictate their fate. The document was exactly what I had anticipated. Harrison Industries was trying to buy their way into the sustainable market without changing a thing. Old practices disguised under new promises, cost-cutting measures with a veneer of green initiatives. It was business as usual, wrapped in a desperate attempt to appear relevant. I read every line carefully, every clause, every commitment, or lack thereof, highlighted their ignorance, their reliance on outdated models, and their inability to see the future I had been building. A buzz on my phone caught my attention. Marcus's name flashed across the screen. "Dad's nervous about this Maxwell deal. Says it's our last chance to turn things around. Guess you were wrong about the industry changing, sis." I didn't reply. Instead, I placed the tablet down and picked up the red corporate stamp, the same one I had used to approve contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It was more than a tool. It was a symbol of authority, of control, and of the irony that fate had delivered into my hands. I pressed the stamp down firmly. Rejected. A single word in bright red ink. Not out of revenge, but out of principle. Harrison Industries wasn't ready. They weren't willing to adapt. And if they wanted to survive, they would have to face the reality that the old ways were over. For the first time, I allowed myself a small smile. This wasn't just a contract. It was a lesson. A demonstration of the power that comes from vision, patience, and resilience. The same daughter they had scorned as useless now held the key to their survival. The next morning, I walked into the familiar lobby of Harrison Industries. The marble floors gleamed under the morning light, and the receptionists greeted me with the same plastic smiles. But I wasn't the same Olivia Harrison who had trembled in their presence 3 years ago. I was Olivia Evans, CEO of Sterling Industries, and the company they needed more than they realized. The elevator ride to the top floor brought back memories of endless proposals, ignored ideas, and warnings they had refused to hear. But now, those memories fueled a quiet confidence. Sarah, my assistant, stood beside me, tablet in hand. They're in worse shape than we thought. The Maxwell rejection hit hard, she whispered. I nodded. Every setback they had faced over the years had been a warning I had tried to deliver, ignored. Now, the tables had turned. Harrison Industries' fate rested in the hands of the very daughter they had dismissed. The boardroom doors opened. My father sat at the head of the table, older, wearier. The arrogance of years spent unchallenged replaced by a subtle tension. Marcus, attempting composure, failed to hide his worry. Miss Evans, my father said, rising to shake my hand. I took it firmly, noting his hesitation, recognition, fear, perhaps a little of both. Let's skip the pleasantries, I said, taking a seat. We all know why I'm here. Harrison Industries is failing. Your quarterly reports show a 60% drop in profits. Clients are leaving, and your attempt to secure Maxwell Corp has collapsed under outdated practices. Marcus opened his mouth, but I cut him off. For 3 years, your company ignored warnings, dismissed innovation, and clung to obsolete methods. Now you're paying the price. But I'm here to offer a solution. I slid the acquisition documents across the table. Sterling Industries was prepared to acquire Harrison Industries, modernize operations, retain most employees, implement sustainable practices, and turn a failing empire into a profitable, forward-looking company. The board members hesitated, glancing between my father and me. My father sank into his chair, stunned. You can't. I can, I replied, calm, composed. And I am. I explained the terms, the benefits, the opportunities. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't personal. It was business. The company they had built, the employees who depended on them, the legacy they valued. Sterling Industries could save it all. They just had to accept the reality they had resisted for decades. Silence fell. Marcus's jaw dropped. My father's expression shifted from anger to disbelief. Then a flicker of understanding. Recognition, maybe. Or fear. Either way, the balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Olivia, my father whispered, the first time he had spoken my name without condemnation in years. Yes, Dad. I asked, steady and unwavering. Recognize the daughter you dismissed as useless, the one holding your company's future in her hands. The room was tense, a moment suspended between past grievances and the possibility of reconciliation. I had spent years building credibility, authority, and a future I could be proud of. Now all that work culminated in this, the ultimate lesson in vision, strategy, and resilience. I knew the next steps would require careful negotiation, patience, and diplomacy. But for now, the daughter they had written off as worthless had proven what mattered most. That capability, foresight, and courage could not be measured by approval or inheritance alone. The silence in that boardroom was heavier than any insult my father had ever thrown at me. 30 years of authority sat at the head of that table. And yet, in that moment, he looked smaller than I had ever seen him. You planned this, Marcus said, his voice sharp but unsteady. You rejected the Maxwell deal just to weaken us. I met his gaze without blinking. No, I rejected it because your proposal was dishonest. You wanted access to sustainable markets without actually becoming sustainable. One of the board members cleared his throat. Miss Evans, if we agree to this acquisition, what guarantees do we have? I slid another document forward. Full operational restructuring within 12 months. Transition to certified sustainable supply chains. Retention of 80% of your workforce. Profit recovery projected within 18 months. I paused deliberately. And leadership accountability. My father stiffened. You would remove me from my own company? He asked, disbelief laced with wounded pride. I would restructure leadership. I corrected calmly. Harrison Industries doesn't need ego. It needs adaptation. The word ego landed harder than I intended, but it was true. 3 years ago, I had stood in the same room begging him to look at projections, research, environmental reports. He hadn't even read them. Now, he was being asked to sign away control. The irony wasn't cruel. It was earned. Marcus pushed his chair back slightly. You can't just walk in here and take everything. I'm not taking, I said quietly. I'm saving. I stood and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline I had stared at countless times when I worked under my father. Back then, I had felt invisible. Now I felt inevitable. You have 6 months before bankruptcy becomes unavoidable. I continued. Your stock has dropped. Clients are leaving. Environmental penalties are piling up. Without restructuring, this company collapses. I turn back to face them. And if it collapses, hundreds of employees lose their jobs. That was the part that mattered most to me. Not revenge. Not validation. People. My father looked at the documents again, slower this time. The anger was fading, replaced by something unfamiliar, reflection. Why, he asked finally. After everything, why help us? For a moment, the room disappeared. I was 28 again, standing in the living room, being told I was nothing, but I wasn't that girl anymore. Because I built something better, I said. And better doesn't destroy. It transforms. Silence again. One of the older board members leaned forward. Mr. Harrison, this is the strongest offer we've received. If we reject it, there may not be another. Marcus looked at my father desperately. Dad. He raised a hand to stop him. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't reacting. He was thinking. You said, he began slowly, eyes locked on mine, that the industry would change. It did, I replied. And you said we would fall behind. You did. His jaw tightened, but there was no denial this time. Only truth. He looked down at the final page. The signature line. The $1 million signature that would determine everything. 3 years ago, he had told me to go prove myself. Now, he was staring at proof. I was wrong, he said quietly. Marcus inhaled sharply. The board members exchanged looks, but I didn't react. Because apologies whispered in private didn't undo public humiliation. If we move forward, I said carefully, this isn't about pride. It's about commitment, full transparency, sustainable transition, and shared leadership. He looked up. Shared. You stay on as a consultant for 1 year. You learn the new systems. You help guide the transition. After that, leadership shifts fully under Sterling. It wasn't punishment. It was accountability. He studied me for a long moment. You've changed, he said. No, I replied softly. I stopped asking for permission. That landed. He picked up the pen. The room felt suspended in time. 30 years of control. 3 years of silence. A lifetime of doubt. And then, he signed. The scratch of ink against paper was almost quiet, almost insignificant. But it was the loudest moment of my life. The board members quickly followed with procedural signatures. Marcus didn't. He pushed his chair back abruptly. I won't be part of this. That's your choice, I said calmly. He left without looking at me. The door shut behind him. And just like that, Harrison Industries became a subsidiary of Sterling. The company that had kicked me out for being useless now needed my signature to survive. But the real power wasn't in that ink. It was in the journey that led there. As the meeting ended, my father approached me slowly. I should have listened, he admitted. I held his gaze. Yes, you should have. There was no bitterness in my voice, just fact. Will you ever forgive me? He asked. I considered the question. Forgiveness isn't automatic, I said. It's earned, the same way respect is. He nodded. For the first time, not as a CEO, not as a patriarch, but as a man realizing his daughter had surpassed him. When I stepped out of that building, cameras were already gathering outside. News of the acquisition had spread fast. Reporters shouted questions. Miss Evans, how does it feel to acquire Harrison Industries? I smiled slightly. It feels like progress. Because that's what it was. Not revenge. Not destruction. Progress. And the girl who once walked out of those gates with a suitcase had just walked back and holding the future. Success is loud in headlines. But healing is quiet. 2 weeks after the acquisition, I sat behind the same mahogany desk my father had ruled from for 3 decades. The nameplate had changed. Harrison Industries, a Sterling company. A subtle shift, but a permanent one. The office still smelled the same. Polished wood, old paper ambition. The city skyline outside the window hadn't changed either. But I had, and so had everything else. The first days were intense. Meetings with department heads, financial audits, sustainability transition plans. Some employees were nervous, others relieved. Many had seen the collapse coming but felt powerless to stop it. I made one thing clear from day one. No mass layoffs. We rebuild. We retrain. We evolve. The relief in their faces told me I'd made the right decision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about responsibility. My father started the following Monday as a consultant. The first meeting was awkward. He knocked before entering. Knocked. I had never seen him hesitate at a door in his own building. Come in, I said evenly. He stepped inside, holding a notebook, not giving orders, not issuing commands, listening. I reviewed the sustainability framework, he began carefully. There are supply chain risks you may want to monitor. There was no arrogance in his tone, just contribution. I nodded. Sit. Let's go through it. For the first time in my life, we worked side by side. Not as dictator and daughter, but as professionals. It wasn't warm. It wasn't healed. But it was progress. Marcus, however, never returned. He resigned from the board and left the company entirely. I heard through industry contacts that he joined a private equity firm overseas. Still chasing quick profits. Still avoiding long-term responsibility. Some patterns don't change overnight. My mother called a week after the acquisition was announced publicly. Her voice carried a softness I didn't recognize. I always knew you were capable, she said. Your father was just stubborn. I closed my eyes briefly. Revisionist history. It wasn't just him, I replied calmly. Silence lingered on the line. You should come to dinner, she continued quickly. We can celebrate properly. As a family. Family. The word felt complicated now. I'm not the daughter you wanted, I said gently. I never was. You're exactly what we wanted, she insisted. No, I corrected quietly. I'm exactly what you tried to change. Another silence. This one heavier. If you want to rebuild something, I continued, it has to start with honesty, not rewriting the past. She didn't argue, and for the first time in my life, she didn't dismiss me either. We didn't fix everything in that call, but we didn't avoid it, and that mattered. Running Harrison under Sterling wasn't simple. Legacy companies carry pride, habits, and resistance embedded in their walls. Some senior managers struggled with the transition to transparent reporting and environmental accountability. I expected that. Change is uncomfortable, but uncomfortable doesn't mean wrong. Over the next months, we implemented new compliance systems, invested in green infrastructure, and renegotiated supplier contracts. Slowly, quarterly losses stabilized. Then, for the first time in 3 years, profit returned. Not explosive, not reckless, sustainable. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The useless daughter had modernized the empire. One evening, after a long strategy meeting, my father lingered behind. "You were right," he said quietly, staring at the financial projection screen. "About everything." I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just nodded. "I know." He looked at me, not with authority, but with something new. Respect. "You didn't destroy what I built," he continued. "You saved it." "I transformed it." I corrected gently. He exhaled slowly. "I don't know how to fix what I said to you." "You can't erase it," I replied, "but you can choose differently now." And he did. In meetings, he began crediting the sustainability team openly. He acknowledged transition challenges publicly. He stopped interrupting. Small changes, but meaningful ones. And somewhere in the middle of board presentations and compliance audits, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't angry anymore. I had wanted success to feel like victory, but it felt like closure. The night I was thrown out, I thought proving them wrong would be the ultimate satisfaction. But sitting in that office now, watching quarterly numbers stabilize and employees regain security, I understood something deeper. This wasn't about being right. It was about building something strong enough that doubt couldn't touch it. The real revenge hadn't been rejection. It had been evolution. One afternoon, as I reviewed a new renewable infrastructure proposal, the intercom buzzed. "Ms. Evans, your father is here for the Sustainability Alignment meeting." I smiled faintly. "Send him in." He entered with updated reports, glasses low on his nose. "Ready to teach me about the future?" he asked lightly. I tilted my head. "Ready to learn?" He nodded. And in that moment, it didn't feel like I had won against him. It felt like we had finally stepped into the same century. 3 years ago, they kicked me out for being useless. Today, their company stood because of the vision they once rejected. But the real transformation wasn't corporate. It was personal, because I no longer needed their validation. And that was freedom. People think the $1 million signature was the moment that changed everything. It wasn't. The real change happened long before that pen ever touched paper. It happened the night I walked out of my parents' house with a single suitcase and no guarantee of success. It happened during the nights I chose belief over bitterness. And it happened the day I realized I didn't need to prove them wrong anymore. 6 months after the acquisition, Harrison Industries, now fully integrated under Sterling, reported its first fully sustainable quarter in company history. Energy waste down 48%, carbon emissions reduced by 35%, profit margins stabilizing. Industry analysts called it a remarkable transformation. They praised strategic restructuring, visionary leadership, forward-thinking innovation. They didn't know the story behind it. They didn't know that 3 years earlier, I had been standing in a marble living room being told I was nothing but a disappointment. Sometimes I think back to that night. My father's voice, my mother's silence, the way the gates closed behind me. I remember feeling small, rejected, unwanted, but I also remember something else. Resolve. That quiet voice inside me that whispered, "You're not useless. You're just early." And that voice turned out to be right. The company thrived not because I took control, but because I built something worth leading. Employees who once feared layoffs now contributed ideas. Departments once resistant to change began proposing efficiency upgrades on their own. The culture shifted, not overnight, but steadily. Leadership meetings felt different now. More discussion, less dominance. And my father, who once dismissed sustainability as weakness, now advocated for long-term environmental investments in board sessions. One afternoon, after a particularly productive strategy meeting, he lingered again. "I spent 30 years building something I thought was strong," he said quietly. but I built it on pride. I listened. You built on vision, I replied. Just incomplete vision. He nodded slowly. And you completed it. It wasn't a grand apology. It wasn't dramatic. But it was real. And real mattered more. My mother visited the office for the first time a few weeks later. She stood in the lobby, looking around at the redesigned branding, the sterling insignia integrated beside Harrison's original crest. You've made it beautiful, she said softly. It was always capable of being. I answered. We walked through departments together. Employees greeted me with confidence, not fear. With respect, not obligation. I saw something shift in her expression. Understanding, not just of my success, but of who I had become. You're different, she said as we reached the elevator. No, I replied gently. I stopped shrinking. She didn't argue. And for once, she didn't try to correct me. That evening, alone in my office, I opened the drawer where I'd kept something for 3 years. A folded piece of paper. The original proposal I had presented to my father the night he threw me out. Sustainable transition strategy. Projected 5-year industry evolution. Risk assessment if ignored. Everything that had eventually come true. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I placed it into the shredder. Not out of anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. The proof wasn't in predictions. It was in results. The intercom buzzed softly. Ms. Evans, the press is here for the quarterly statement. I straightened my blazer and walked toward the elevator. As the doors closed, I caught my reflection in the mirrored walls. Confident, calm, certain. Not the daughter who was told she was useless, but the woman who built something undeniable. At the press conference, a reporter raised her hand. Ms. Evans, how does it feel to save the very company that once rejected your ideas? I smiled slightly. It feels like progress, I answered. Was it personal? I paused thoughtfully. It started that way, I admitted, but success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself capable. Another reporter leaned forward. And your family? I met the cameras steadily. They needed my signature to survive, but I needed their rejection to grow. The room fell quiet, because that was the truth. If they hadn't kicked me out, if they hadn't called me useless, if they hadn't underestimated me, I might never have built Sterling the way I did. Pain became fuel. Doubt became discipline. Rejection became redirection. That was the real $1 million deal. Not the acquisition, not the contract, but the transformation. Later that night, I stood by the office window, watching the city lights flicker below. 3 years ago, I left this building feeling discarded. Tonight, I stood at the top floor, not because I inherited power, but because I earned it. My phone buzzed. A simple message from my father. Proud of you. I stared at the screen for a moment. 3 words. Years too late. But genuine. I typed back. Thank you. Not because I needed it, but because I had outgrown the hurt. 3 years ago, they kicked me out for being useless. Today, their company thrives because of what I built. But the real victory? It wasn't the signature. It wasn't the acquisition. It wasn't the headlines. It was this. I never crawled back. I rose. And sometimes, that's the most powerful signature of all.